Hi, everyone. I'm Carli.
And I'm Sophia.
And this is Away She Goes, a podcast from Girls Who Travel.
Each episode will help you feed your wanderlust with travel tips, stories, inspiration, and more. Away she goes.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Away She Goes. Today, we are joined by Dr. Peter Neff, who is a scientist who has spent some time living and working on Antarctica. Dr. Neff, thank you for joining us. If you want to just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Peter Neff. I am an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. I'm a glaciologist and what we call a paleoclimatologist. I drill core samples into glaciers in Antarctica and elsewhere that get us each layer of snow and ice going back in time, back several hundred years and actually even several million years, and we can reconstruct different aspects of how Antarctic climate and sort of by extension how global climate works, which is pretty important looking forward into a increasingly warm world. So definitely it's an interesting time to be a glaciologist. Glaciers all over the planet are changing in ways that we need to understand. So that's one of my jobs, is trying to understand the future of ice on Earth.
Absolutely. Was it always a dream of yours to live or work on Antarctica? Was that always a goal that you had, or was it something that just obviously kind of comes with the territory of doing that kind of work?
Yeah, it's more serendipity, being in the right place at the right time than any drive to do it. I couldn't even tell you the first time I thought about Antarctica, but I grew up in Washington State, and always had a volcano with glaciers on it in the background where I grew up, Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood. So maybe that was a seed of ice. And when I got sort of towards high school and getting really into science and history, I guess that sort of was when I first came across glaciers as a topic to study, and just went on to my in-state school, University of Washington, which happens to be a world center of glaciology and particularly ice core research, which requires a combination of folks who understand how ice accumulates and flows, and then also folks who know how to measure the chemistry of the snow and ice, and can use that to build records of past climate and environmental change. So I showed up as an undergrad, and I think my sophomore year, I saw a job ad posted on a corkboard that said lab work with possible field work in Greenland and Antarctica. And that was about all I needed to hear. So I managed to apply and pester the professor enough to get that position. And the rest is history, I suppose. I still collaborate with that original mentor. Got to go to Greenland within a year of starting that job, and then once I started my master's degree, also at University of Washington, I got on my first Antarctic ice core drilling project, a place where we were, deep in interior West Antarctica, and drilling an ice core, a part of a big team drilling an ice core down 2 miles deep. Actually, the second deepest ice core ever drilled, a place called Waste Divide. Yeah, so it was a fantastic start. And so ever since then, I guess I've just been chasing opportunities to get down there, different projects through the sort of academic degrees you need to get to stay in this line of work. And still hustling today as a professor, getting research projects funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, which then takes us to Antarctica. It's to get down there for big projects and long amounts of time, going with national Antarctic programs tends to be the way. Otherwise, most people see Antarctica from a cruise ship, most likely sailing from South America to the Antarctic Peninsula, which is actually the one part of Antarctica I haven't been to. But
Yeah, irony.
yeah, so I don't get to see as much wildlife as folks on cruises, but we still interact with all of the fuzzy critters, penguins and stuff at the coast as we work our way inland to our field sites.
How much time total would you say you've spent there? Like how many trips have you taken? Several, it sounds like.
Yeah. Over the last 15 years, I guess. I did the math in the car this morning on the way to daycare. um, so yeah, I've been 7 times,
Okay.
and each time is usually been about 3 months. I guess this
Okay.
last year I actually went 2 different times in the same season, and the Antarctic summer science season is like October to February. But I tended to go between November and the very end of January. So 3 months each time. So it's roughly 18 months plus that I've spent down there,
Cool.
and yeah, usually between 2 to almost 4 month chunks.
Wow. So if you wouldn't mind, you touched on it in your introduction. If you wouldn't mind, because a lot of what we focus on with girls who travel is, sustainability, and obviously you touched on the world is getting warmer. Can you touch a little bit more on what exactly it is that you're researching? What about it brings you to Antarctica, and kind of what you guys are looking for and what you're hoping to find when you're doing that work?
Yeah, so I definitely am most specifically an ice core scientist. I really need these ice core samples to ask and answer the questions that I'm after. And certainly in going to Antarctica with the U.S. National Science Foundation, we are obligated to only answer questions or ask and answer questions that are best answered by samples or time in Antarctica. So we don't just go for willy-nilly. It's quite an extreme operation, as you can imagine, big, civilian and military operation. And so we go down to either reconstruct aspects of Antarctica's climate, which is really important, particularly in regions of Antarctica that are responding more quickly to human-caused change or even natural-driven change. Antarctica is a really big, complex place that we have not been occupying very long as human beings. Only since the 1950s have we had a continuous presence, and still in some large regions. Like I study the Pacific coastline of what we call West Antarctica. So think of the very southern Pacific Ocean. Once you
Mhm.
bump into Antarctica down there, that's what I think about. We have a stretch of coastline there that's longer than the west coast of the United States, and we have no permanent research stations,
Wow.
no continuous weather observations. So that's a place that I've been working to chip away at, going to places right on the coast that are still good for ice core drilling, that are cold enough, have nice annual layers that we can drill into. So actually, most recently, back January, we went down on a South Korean icebreaker and then used helicopters to hop off the icebreaker when we got near to a site that was good for ice core drilling. Spent 2 weeks on the glacier drilling as many ice cores as deep as possible. So about 150 meters deep, 300 feet deep, and bring those back to the ship and then sail them back to the labs, actually in South Korea. So we have a challenge is that we have to actually bring our ice samples back to our labs, which is a
Mhm.
challenge. So we then have a supply chain we have to get through, cold all the way back to the United States. And the most sort of globally relevant thing that we reconstruct in ice cores is the past composition of the atmosphere trapped in air bubbles in the ice. So any glacier, if you get down below the layers of snow as it compacts into solid ice, that solid ice that started as snow is going to have air bubbles in it. And those air bubbles are just the airspace that was originally between the fingers of a pretty six-sided snowflake. And that's a direct capture of the atmosphere in places where it's cold enough and the snow is clean enough. And that's where Antarctica is the best place in the world for archiving that old air. And we have continuous records of that now as an international ice coring community that date back from today, continuously back 800,000 years.
Wow.
I'm a part of a big project called Coldex, a big science and technology center funded by the National Science Foundation, where we're going to special places where even older ice has gotten sort of trapped up in some of the transantarctic mountains. And we're finding not continuous information, but snapshots, little sort of trapped pockets of ice that are 1 to 5, even 6 million years old. And
Wow.
they're a little harder to interpret, but still give us snapshots, particularly that help us get direct information about how carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is related to temperature over those really long time scales, much longer than the time scale of our current urgently bad change of nearly doubling carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in the last
Mhm.
100 or 150 years. So really, it's that present and future problem of human caused warming that drives our research into the past. We want to get past targets of warming or how much sea level rose in the past warm time, so that we can give targets to our climate models so that we train them. They can repeat what we've observed in the past with ice cores. We then have some more confidence projecting forward in time to make sure we all have the right information to plan for with respect to sea level rise. Coastal planners need numbers and dates to and probabilities to plan for and make decisions in paying for really expensive infrastructure upgrades, knowing that sea level is going to continue to rise for the foreseeable future.
Interesting. It always makes me think, I'm sure you get this a lot, the movie The Day After Tomorrow,
Yep, yep.
where Dennis Quaid, he does the same thing. I think he's like a paleoclimatologist, and
He's an ice core scientist.
he's
Good old
drilling,
Dennis.
he's out in Antarctica drilling ice cores. Yep.
Yep, and yeah, and then yeah, and it actually connects to a process that we are concerned about is the fracture and
Hmm.
collapse of ice shelves in Antarctica, which we've observed in places like the Antarctic Peninsula, which is the sort of northernmost, warmest part of Antarctica. But we are seeing change in ice shelves, which sort of are like the cork in the bottle of the Antarctic ice sheet, where they're
Hmm.
changing, and if you weaken the cork, the whole bottle behind it can shoot out. So that's a major line of research across all Antarctic science. Really, it's the most important question we have is what's going to happen to Antarctica, because
Hmm.
there's enough freshwater ice locked up in Antarctica that if it all melted, which it won't in the foreseeable future, but if it did, it's on the order of 60 meters of sea level rise that would come from that. So we have
Yeah.
records in the past during from the last ice age to today where sea levels changed by that hundreds of feet. um, we're looking at a smaller number going forward, because of the warming that we're imparting on the Earth, but still considerable, especially when you get out beyond the year 2100, but to 2200, 2300, the amount of sea level can potentially get up to 10 or 15 meters of global sea
Hmm.
level rise by that time. And hopefully we still have a society, a civilization to protect by that time, and make
Right.
sure that we can adapt to that change if we have, if we see the curve coming in the road.
Absolutely. So obviously, it's a very harsh climate. It's about as remote as you can be. What are some challenges about living there? I know you've only been there for a few months maybe at a time, but obviously, I'm sure that comes with its challenges.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and in every type of like living infrastructure we have down there, there are different challenges, and we sort of move through stages as you deploy to Antarctica. We call it. You're flying commercial, from the United States to New Zealand. So we actually then fly with U.S. Air Force aircraft out of Christchurch, New Zealand, which has been where the Navy and the Air Force have flown to Antarctica since the 1950s. And then we land at McMurdo Station, which is the largest research station in Antarctica by far, and gets
Mhm.
up to 1,000 people in the summertime when it's at full capacity. Most stations are only 100 to 200 people in the summertime. Um, and that's a hodgepodge station. It sort of looks like an Alaskan mining town. It's on a little volcanic island, and it's been cobbled together by the Navy and now civilian defense contractor operators. So it's a messy, dirty place. You're staying in dorms, pretty basic accommodations. There's it's essentially like a dorm system, and you're issued your linens when you get there. It's very much like going to college. And then those of us who are going then on to deep field camps, we're trying to protect like a good 7 weeks of time from late November to early January to be out there doing our research, especially ice core drilling. You need time to just day after day go deeper and deeper and deeper. You're then doing a bit of a scavenger hunt all around station, trying to get your field gear, get all the safety trainings you're required to have before you can leave station. And usually we have a target, like we try to push our way through and get out of station by Thanksgiving. Although Thanksgiving is quite a celebration, and any holiday down there is well acknowledged because everybody's working hard, they're cold, you need good food, and so they put out a really amazing spread and have the whole station come through in shifts.
Okay.
Big old hunks of meat they're carving off, and
Wow.
amazing pastries. They get some pretty talented chefs coming down there because it's a bit of an adventure type of employment. So
Absolutely.
McMurdo is not as challenging. Once we get out to the field, you're looking at, so like we have a team of 12 people going to a place called the Allen Hills this season, which is on the edge of the East Antarctic ice sheet, sort of in the mountains. You're up a mile high elevation, and because you're at the edge of the ice sheet, there are always constantly katabatic winds blowing through. So it's always around minus 25 degrees Celsius and always blowing between 10 to 30 knot winds.
Wow.
Um, and that really grinds on you, especially when you're living then in little pyramid tents that can only be heated for a short amount of time when you're getting undressed or getting dressed. We actually just use little Coleman propane
Propane
stoves for
heaters,
that short
yeah.
amount of time, just because that's one of the worst things is waking up in the morning. We're wearing like Carhartt overalls, and they're like, a plank of wood in the morning, and you
Oh
gotta,
my God.
you know, slide your way in there.
Frozen, yeah.
Get your morning business done. The bathroom facilities are very basic, and we capture all of our liquid and solid waste. So, think of a 55-gallon bucket for liquid waste and 5-gallon buckets for solid waste. That's not fun for 7 weeks.
I bet. Oh
Um,
my God.
so, there's a lot of that, and it comes down to really practical challenges too. Not on the point of sustainability, but all of our power down there essentially comes from generators that are powered by
Mhm.
by gasoline or diesel fuel. So, and those are a challenge to keep running in the cold uh, conditions. And yeah, you're trying to do your science. People are out there doing a whole range of science, going out collecting biological samples, collecting rock samples to understand glacial history. And the Allen Hills, where we find this really old ice, is also where you find meteorites that have been stranded on the surface of the ice there that come from places like Mars. Really important places. So you have this sort of high level thing you're trying to do, but then also have these really low level human survival needs. And yeah, it's a challenge, but then it also sort of leads to the best part of it, where we tend to have teams that become really tight and really integrated, like a family, with issues that families have, but like really huge community focus of just maybe there used to be a time where people were overly tough and say, "Oh, you got to tough it out and got to be a
Mhm.
polar hero. You might get frostbite." Yeah, like none of that applies anymore. We want our teams to get through the experience safely. At the utmost, we want to get as much science done as possible. But you have a dozen people, half of whom may not have been to Antarctica before, and they've got to get through this like 7-week marathon in a totally
Mhm.
foreign environment. And you're out there thankfully pretty well connected to the station, and we even have Starlink internet now. We've brought that into our camps for
Wow.
the first time. So I could FaceTime my daughter on her birthday.
Mhm.
um, and it's only about a 45-minute flight, and thankfully actually the weather conditions are pretty reliable between McMurdo Station and our field camp, so that there's a sense of safety there. And
Mhm.
but also a big trust in the Canadian pilots that fly the smaller planes that get us from the research station to the field sites. So yeah, a lot of moving parts. A lot of.
Absolutely.
I think I always have people ask about like, oh, it must be so like peaceful and quiet in Antarctica, and it's like, well, if it's not windy, then there are generators running, and then there are aircraft flying over and helicopters. So, and I actually this last season I made the mistake. We were taking a break and had our generators all on, for days, and it was nice and sunny and calm. I was like, okay, let's turn off the generator. Let's enjoy some quiet on our little coffee break. Then you got to turn the generator back on, and it won't start. And so then we had a
Yep.
problem that turned into actually a half a day problem. Our generator just quit. So yeah, it keeps you humble,
It's always
that
something.
place. Yeah. Yeah, the classic, the cliche is it's a harsh continent, and so it's just everybody's doing their best. And I think it's a military phrase, but it's like slow is steady, steady is fast. Like you just sort of gotta plod your way through everything, not
Yep.
rush, not make mistakes, not get injured. So yeah, it's a wild operation to be a part of, and the U.S. Antarctic program is you know probably the thing that gets me waving the flag and screaming eagles more than anything else. It's
Love the
really an
screaming eagle.
incredible operation that's really underappreciated by the average American.
Absolutely, and I originally found you on TikTok, and I was fascinated by it. So I when we kinda geared up for this next season of the podcast, I was like, "I really wanna try to, like, reach out to this guy, get him on," because so many people some people don't even know that you can travel there on a cruise. Some people don't even realize that tourists, can go there, but I think it's so important and it's so interesting for people to hear this very unique perspective of somebody who has lived there, who has spent so much time on these remote parts that no tourist really is ever gonna get to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It gives you a depth of understanding of the place that's hard to replicate. So that, yeah, is one of the
Mhm,
reasons that I'm motivated to try to keep, stay on top of the social media
mhm.
grind. I have, pretty much dropped the ball this year, but after I had a really big last 18 months or so of field work with a drilling project in British Columbia and then 2 different projects in Antarctica. And so I'm taking a bit of a break, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, a really powerful tool to reach people, and it removes some of the filter of having to try to explain to other types of media, to journalists, what it's like, which
Mhm.
it's like playing a game of telephone. So social media does have that power of being a very direct way to
Mhm.
communicate, and especially when you're in a place and if you're able to have a little extra space in your brain to, to talk about the science when you're in the place, like especially on a platform like TikTok. Uh it's such a personal visual
Mhm.
media platform that
Yeah.
I haven't done enough of it, but yeah, really powerful to connect people directly to, and I think I'm a pretty visual person as well. As a scientist, I'm
I am
supposed to be
too.
all about numbers and equations and things, but my presentations are pretty full of imagery and videos, and I think other scientists have been pretty slow to sort of supplement. Like, yeah, you need the fundamentals and the numbers to back up what you're saying, but
Mhm.
there's nothing like showing somebody a process. And we're not also lucky that we're able to do that. I am very privileged in that way, and I'm extremely privileged that Antarctic fieldwork has played such a big role in my career. Most people, I mean, are lucky if they get to go at all, maybe one
Mhm.
time, 2 times. You never know when it's potentially your last time in Antarctica either. So yeah, it's a huge privilege, and I try to represent it fairly accurately on social media.
Mhm.
Without the rules around doing some of this stuff are a little bit scary, and so I guess I always try to tread lightly as well. And we always have to give credit, of course, to the National Science Foundation
Mhm.
for supporting us and
Right.
running the whole operation. And there are definitely sensitivities to what they want represented in the media, but it's also not as though we're hiding things. That's I get so many comments on social media about conspiracies and UFOs, and I don't
Of
know,
course.
call it flat Earth or whatever.
Oh God.
Um, it's also, it's a pretty amazing operation we have down there, but none of us as humans in publicly funded work are clever enough to hide global conspiracies in what we do. If
Yeah.
you if you see how the whole operation sort of is barely held together, with the level of funding it has, and the amazing humans that are putting in huge parts of their heart and soul into the operation. It's a really capable program, but it is reliant on the commitment of really dedicated folks, and we're lucky
Absolutely.
lucky to have it.
So being there as much as you have, I'm going to assume that you've experienced both 24-hour darkness and 24-hour daylight at some
I
point.
haven't both actually, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, I've not had the pleasure of an Antarctic winter, and I feel pretty good about that actually. I think it'd be hard.
Yeah, so you're
Um,
not upset about that.
Yeah, and it's, once you commit to an Antarctic winter, I mean, unless you're at a few of the stations on the Antarctic Peninsula, which actually wouldn't have 24-hour darkness either. I mean, you're trapped there, like
Mhm.
with the people you're with, and it's great fodder for TV and movies. But yeah, the 24-hour sunlight, I will say, it fires you up. It's pretty cool, and I mean, it can end up messing you up after a couple of weeks, where if you don't figure out good systems to get yourself to bed and falling asleep in the
Mhm.
light. And we tend to have the fabric of your tent is actually fairly intentional, the color of your fabric of your tent. So like the sort of old school Scott pyramid tents we use are a yellow fabric, which is sort of cheerful and keeps you in a
Mhm.
good mood, as opposed to like a dark blue
Yeah.
or red. Like, I don't know, I'm sure there are people who could tell me what all those things would make the teams do, but so you do need like something to cover your eyes, or I tend to bring down just a cotton sweatshirt with a hood that I can put over
Yeah.
my eyes. But really the best system is once you get out to the field site and you're working your buns off every single day, you will sleep.
You're exhausted. Yeah.
Yeah, in the 7 week, that sort of long marathon style camp, like you are working long enough hours and enough days that you actually do have days off, and intentional downtime, and movies in the evenings, or crosswords are big. Cribbage
Mhm.
sometimes is really popular in camps. So you need to have rest time, and
Mhm.
the maximum would be 1 day a week, but in a field camp that's pretty rare still, compared to if you have shorter amounts of field work. Like our 2 weeks off of this icebreaker, that was a situation where you work and you eat and you sleep. You
And
do
that's
nothing
it.
else,
Yeah.
and because you're just racing the clock.
Mhm.
Um, So actually, that was my first type of field work that was more like a sprint than a marathon.
Mhm.
Um, which is odd because then, the other aspect of being on a ship is that your expedition is probably 50 to 60 days long, but you're only going to be doing the hard work for 14 of those days. And
Mhm.
otherwise on the ship, you're pretty uh I don't know, sedentary. Like certainly you're
Yeah,
chipping in and helping wherever you can, but yeah, it's an interesting contrast in the pace and the intensity of things.
absolutely. Yeah, I about 6 years ago, I went to Iceland and I went in June, so it never got dark. The sun did set when I was there. It set for like a couple hours, so it never got dark. It got like slightly towards dusk. The sun did go down for a little bit and then it came back up, but it messed me up. I was only there for a week and I said to my friend who I was with, I was like, I don't feel like I'm living separate days. I feel like this is one really long day and I'm like taking a bunch of naps. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
differentiate because and if I would wake up in the middle of the night and our hotel room had, blackout curtains, but if I would just see the sun at 3 in the morning, I was like, that was it. I couldn't
Yeah.
I
I wake
couldn't
up.
sleep. Yeah, it messed me
Yeah.
up a little bit.
Yeah, you really get set on the sort of daily schedule of the operations in Antarctica
Mhm.
too, which helps.
Yeah.
Like the pilots all wake up at 6 a.m. and start doing weather checks by 7:30, make their decisions for what missions they can fly by 8 o'clock. So you sort of have a drum beat that you have to hold to. But yeah, I think for me it's been like there's only been one situation where I was in a field camp that was near enough to the coast in East Antarctica, which is actually deceptively far north. The coast of East Antarctica crosses the Antarctic Circle.
Oh.
Um, so we went from our field site. It was, had done a 90-mile tractor traverse or something like that. We were out there for 2.5 months and got back to the station, and it was starting to get dusky when we were at our camp. And actually, our tents, after that amount of time, it was a really snowy place. Our tents were totally topped over with snow. And so I woke up one of the last nights, I was like, wow, it seems really dark. I must have gotten really buried with snow. And thankfully, I wasn't totally buried with snow. It was just starting to get dark.
Mhm.
And by the time we got back to the station, a week or so later, one evening, we were all catching up at the station bar afterwards, and I, come out to walk a couple doors down to my dorm, and it was pitch black. I was like, whoa, I've
I
never been
know.
in never been in the pitch black in Antarctica before. Didn't really anticipate that, thinking of how different it is. That's, would be around 67 degrees north, where McMurdo Station is 67 degrees south,
Mhm.
and McMurdo is 77 degrees. So, a whole 10 degrees latitude further south. It's
Yeah,
really, really different. So
absolutely.
one of the places, I mean, I haven't been many places in Antarctica, but South Pole Station is still a place I have never made it to, which is very different than McMurdo
Mhm.
Station and much more isolated, and a station that's mostly built around doing astronomy and physics
Mhm.
experiments. Um, but we do have a team going through there. One of my students will be on a team going out from South Pole Station, sort of deep into interior Antarctica to try to look into the ice sheet with radar and understand some of these stacks of old ice where we could potentially drill an ice core sometime in the future, not in the near future, but an ice core that would potentially be twice as long in time as our current ice core records. So that's sort of one of the big international challenges in ice core science, is trying to find 1.5 million continuous years of
Mhm.
information, which would, essentially doubles the length of time. If you think of the Earth system as a patient, it doubles the amount of time that you're seeing the heartbeat
Right.
of how the ice ages work. And we really want to better understand some times in the past where we know that the pacing of the heartbeat of ice ages actually changed in frequency.
Mhm.
Um, so that's sort of the pie in the sky goal of the community. Really big, tough projects where you need to commit to 5 years of drilling at a deep, 2 mile deep site like that, or mile and a half deep, and you're also at 10,000 foot elevation
Right.
and minus 30 to minus 40 degrees. So pretty harsh places. Yeah, so Antarctica is a big dynamic place. I think one of the biggest things that even us as scientists don't appreciate is just how big and how diverse in climate and sort of regionally, how diverse Antarctica is. The Antarctic Peninsula is completely different than West Antarctica. East Antarctica is sort of the highest, driest, windiest that everybody sort of imagines all of Antarctica is like, and it is. Most of Antarctica is East Antarctica. And then the coasts, the last
Mhm.
100 kilometers from inland to the coasts are completely different than
Mhm.
inland Antarctica. There's wildlife, there's life, there's rainfall, and a lot of change. It's where we're really seeing faster responses in a lot of ways to to human-caused warming and even natural response times that are faster than we had thought probably 10, 15 years ago.
Alright. It's so I'm, like, hanging on every word, it's so interesting. I've always wanted to go. I will at some point. I've always wanted to go. I
Yeah,
wish I could see it as more, than a tourist. I wish I could go further in beyond the peninsula, but
yeah. Well, you got to keep an eye out for jobs. I mean, as an American, we have more job opportunities down there than anybody else, just due to the scale of our program. So
Mhm,
there are a lot of people who go. I think the biggest pool of jobs is probably in dining.
mhm,
So there are fascinating people who run the dining hall in McMurdo because they do it to support the operation, but of
mhm,
course to get the experience
to
of going
go.
there.
Yeah.
But then the challenge becomes, and if you do put in a couple of years, actually our field camp manager this year and last year started out in dining in McMurdo Station, and the thing that got her pulled into the field support department was she actually put on a production around Christmas of the Nutcracker, all in the theme of the U.S. Antarctic program. So every aspect of the Nutcracker as the play actually progresses was sort of flipped on its head to reflect some aspect of life in McMurdo Station. And it was that community organizing and follow through and putting on a production like that somebody in the field support program was like, she has it.
Yeah.
And then you're no longer trapped at McMurdo Station. You're going out to field camp to support a dozen goofy scientists for 7 weeks. I think it's a common frustration with folks, I think, that end up in McMurdo, is that they don't quite realize how stuck you are in McMurdo, and you really
Mhm,
can't. You're looking at these beautiful mountains and volcano in the background, and you just can't get to them.
mhm.
So it's, yeah, again, we're really privileged as scientists to be able to decide where we go from beyond the stations.
Absolutely. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Is there anything else you want to add? And if you wouldn't mind, before we end, just telling our listeners, I know you said you're taking a social media break, but for when you're not, where we can find you online on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing about Antarctica that folks don't realize is just how connected it is to all of our lives. It's a huge, control knob on global sea level. It plays critical roles in ocean circulation, and we really need to continue to understand it, and also continue to protect it as a place for peaceful pursuit of scientific research that helps humanity. And so, supporting U.S. involvement and our participation in the Antarctic Treaty System is really, really important. And it unfortunately requires a lot of really expensive, big pieces of equipment to maintain our presence there. So we need, support in the form of heavy icebreakers from the U.S. Coast Guard and aircraft from the U.S. Air Force, funding for federal scientific research, the National Science Foundation. So we need to maintain all of that, because if we don't keep doing our big science projects down there, other more challenging forms of competition are going to emerge that are not around doing the best science, and that are going to cause more problems that we don't need in this complex world we live in. So, yeah, I would just encourage folks to learn more about the U.S. Antarctic program. I think it's something that we all should be really, really, really proud of, and I'm certainly proud to be involved. So that's one of the things I try to share about in my social media. So you can find me on mostly Instagram and TikTok these days at icy_Pete, ICY_Pete. Yeah, try to share just a really direct perspective as somebody who's a polar scientist, but particularly Antarctica. Yeah, there's nothing that holds my attention and gets me dreaming about my science projects than Antarctica. Thanks for having me on.
That's all for this episode. If you'd like more Oishi Goes in your life, make sure to stop by girlswhotravel.org/podcast. That's where you can fill out a form if you're interested in being a guest on the show. You can also write to us at oishigosgwt@gmail.com, or leave us a message on our Google voicemail from any phone or computer at 1-563-503-6323. To follow our adventures, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Carli Sees the World. Carli is spelled Carli.
You can also follow me at Sophia AEZ, Sophia with a PH. Away She Goes is part of Girls Who Travel, a community dedicated to radically redefining travel to be inclusive, sustainable, and empowering. You can learn more about GWT, find travel tips and support, shop travel-themed items made by GWT members, and join our Facebook group with nearly 100,000 women all around the world at girlstotravel.org. We can't wait to connect and explore with you. Away she goes.